What do you think it takes for somebody to finally accept that you don't have to just keep saying, I can do it or I have to do it, that you can actually say, I won't do that anymore?
There's only two reasons people change: desperation and inspiration. And I actually think you need both. You need the desperation. You need to bring attention to, how does your current situation feel? Actually feel the stress, the drain, the anxiety, and bring attention to it. Say like, ooh, it doesn't feel good to be where I am. But even that's not enough, because it's like, well, I don't know what else I could do. So then you need the inspiration of, this is what life could look like. And it's hard to say no. It's easier to say no when you're saying yes to something else. So what are you going to say yes to that's going to be more important to you than work?
Welcome to the GenX Shift podcast, a show for Gen Xers who are navigating some pretty tough transitions and aren't sure how to move forward. I'm your host, Michelle Walter, proud Gen Xer, former lawyer turned entrepreneur, huge Jason Momoa fan, and margarita snob. And I've navigated a lot of transitions in my life, from losing my mom suddenly to a heart attack to starting my own business. But I often did it all on my own because I was too stubborn to ask for help. Now I'm on a mission to give actionable strategies to other Gen Xers so that they can find the confidence, courage, and clarity they need to make a shift. So let's rock and roll.
Hey, Gen Xers, what's shaking? Welcome back to this week's podcast episode where I am sitting down with Eric Nehrlich. This episode is for all my beautiful Gen Xers out there who are in a couple of different positions in life. The first one could be if you are finding yourself in a career for the last 20 or so years with what I call kind of a low-grade fever, where it's not lighting you up. You don't really feel like it's in your zone of genius. You're doing the job, but it's like, eh. The second group of people that this conversation is for those Gen Xers who have been in that career for 20 or so years and have found themselves in the position of being an executive leader, but aren't quite sure how to develop those leadership skills so that they can really get the most results from their team and for themselves. Eric is an executive coach who broke the golden handcuffs from working at Google to start his own business about 5 years ago. So he has some beautiful words of advice to share on how you can start your own business, how to recognize when you're experiencing that low-grade fever and what to do about it. And he also shares a beautiful superpower that he developed as a young kid, which is the power to really bridge the gap between people. Growing up in rural Illinois, Eric never really felt like he fit into the conservative Christian community that he was raised in. And so he developed this superpower of being able to kind of be a chameleon with a lot of different people. I relate to that very much. I feel like somebody who doesn't neatly fit into one particular box, and I can sort of have my fingers and toes and feet in all different kinds of boxes at once. It's a lovely superpower, and it's exhausting. And Eric talks about how he has learned to develop that over the years and use it as a superpower now in the work that he does with executive leaders. We also talk about something that isn't talked about a lot, especially among Gen Xers, which is the fact that guys, and those who identify as guys, weren't encouraged in the time periods that we grew up, and also not today, but particularly back in the 70s and 80s, to really be in touch with their emotions. And the reason that's so important is that you want to start to tune into when your emotions, when your body is telling you you have that kind of low-grade fever of dissatisfaction, when you're on the verge of burnout, like Eric was, so that you can learn from that and recognize that it's time to make a change in life. We talk about Eric's book, which is called You Have a Choice: Beyond Hard Work to Meaningful Impact. And the beautiful takeaway from his book is that you can learn to recognize how to give yourself a choice in any circumstance so that you can find that autonomy and feel empowered. This is another one of these conversations that takes a lot of twists and turns, and I had such a great time talking to him. I came away feeling so inspired by a Gen Xer who's a man who is doing the work in the world to use his privilege in ways that can benefit others, to learn to be more in touch with his emotions and to be vulnerable and to show up in a way that shows people how to find that power and choice in their life. So enjoy this conversation with Eric, and I'll catch you on the other side. Hey, Eric, welcome to the GenX Shift podcast. I'm really excited to have you here today.
I'm excited to be here, Michelle. I can't wait to see where the conversation goes.
Yeah, as we were just talking about, we're just going to let it rip, see where it goes. And I always like to let folks know how I know my guests, and we got hooked up through one of my previous guests, Suzanne Campy, who had met you through LinkedIn, and she said, hey, you should reach out to this guy. He'd be an awesome podcast guest. And I did. And I'm so grateful that she made our connection because you have a fascinating background, which we're going to get into. You've written a book, which is on your shelf in the back that we're also going to talk about. And you're just a totally badass Gen Xer. So I'm really excited for folks to get to know you better and know your work in the world and how you're working with leaders as an executive coach and really shepherding people into more of a leadership role in their life. So yeah, I think it's going to be a good conversation.
Yeah, thanks, Michelle. Yeah, I mean, just the idea of a Gen X podcast is so appealing to me. We are, as usually, the forgotten generation. And so focusing on our particular challenges as we go through each stage of life is really, I love the possibility. When Suzanne mentioned you, I was like, ooh, yeah, can you make that introduction? That would be great. So I'm glad she connected us.
Yeah, I feel very fortunate. If for nothing else, this podcast has allowed me to widen my Gen X community, which kind of feels like we're back in school. You know, it's like just getting to know all the cool kids on the block. And so it feels like a big Gen X party, which I love. And you just
you knew the cool kids? I didn't get to know the cool kids.
No, I was always sort of like, I felt like I was always kind of in the middle. You know, I was talking with somebody about this recently. Like, my mom was always the mom that said, you will invite everybody in the class to your birthday party, which at the time I was like, really? And now in hindsight, I'm so glad that she, quote, made me do that. And so I think because of that, I felt like I always had friends, you know, in all the little clique groups. So everybody's cool in hindsight, you know, even the kids that we didn't hang out with or that got picked on, like they're the cool kids, you know, they're the ones that you see like, wow, they really grew up and became awesome adults. So anyway, yeah.
Yeah, I was definitely in the nerd contingent. So like that I mean, I got along okay with the rest of my classmates, but I was always off on in the nerd classes. So,
but nerds are cool.
They are now. In the 80s, not so much.
No. What was nerdy about you? Why did you feel like a nerd?
I mean, I was very good in school. I was a straight A kind of student. I didn't have a lot of outside interests. I also didn't really do I was more interested in learning about things than dealing with people, I guess would be the the short version. So that's coming kind of a lifelong journey for me of, learning to connect to others and developing that whole people side of my skill set, which was very underdeveloped because reasons, I guess. It was not valued, I guess, at least in my household.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I hear that. It's that kind of academic excellence is sort of a double-edged sword. I think it's something that, you know, every parent hopes their kid's going to be like do well in school, of course. And, you know, if you are one of those kids that really excels, sometimes that can be hard to foster relationships in school. So I hear you on that.
Yeah.
I was a straight A kid too in the quote gifted program, whatever the hell that means. And yeah, we can probably talk about some of that too. I get kind of curious about how being the straight A kid really, in my experience, sort of resulted in like this lifelong undercurrent of like a chronic trauma, because getting straight A's all the time, I never really developed any flexibility for failure and getting less than straight A's. So I don't know, did you have a similar experience?
Oh yeah, no, failure was not an option. And so my resilience was very underdeveloped, and there was a lot of tension I had to hold to try to meet those expectations. And eventually I got through it by burning out badly and destroying my body and health. But that's just one of those things you go through. It's a rite of passage, it feels like at this point.
It makes for a good story. And I hate hearing when other people have gone through that too, because I really resonate with that just in terms of creating the burnout and not really having any resilience. I think when we're I felt like I was a high achiever or wanted to be a high achiever from the get-go for reasons I'll probably never fully understand or know. And that does create a lot of tendencies, which I think we're going to get into in terms of like your backstory and why you're doing what you're doing now. But yeah, it's something I've gotten more curious about because especially as an entrepreneur, failure is not an option. And so wishing that I had failed a little bit more when I was growing up, I think would have behooved me now later in life.
Yeah. It's so interesting because it's like I think in American culture, we're like, we want our kids to be successful and we want to make it easy for them. And it's like, actually, no, that's not going to help them. If they have the confidence they can fail and pick themselves up and figure out what to do, like that's going to be the most valuable thing. So like, yeah, when I've got two young kids myself, and like when they were born, my main hope is to teach them persistence and resilience. Like, yes. And so like right now, it's kind of a joke in our household. Like my kid will fall off the bike or fall off the monkey bar. It's like, what do you do when you fall down? You get back up. And the kids just shout it out. I'm like, yes. And it's so interesting because it's like sorry, side note here, but I just have to, it's important to me. Like my daughter is 3 years old, and when she falls down, like all the other mothers will run to her, like, "Are you okay? It's okay." And it's like, "No, back off. She's fine." like my son falls down, they just like, "That's fine. That's a boy being a boy." But a girl falls down and like cries a little bit, everybody rushes to her. It's like, and you see these gender norms like at such an early age, like 2 years old, you're treating them differently. It's like, anyway, sorry, rant over.
100%. No, don't apologize for that. As I like to say, based on another author, podcaster that I follow, Rob Bell, he often says there are no tangents because I think everything has wisdom and juicy nuggets in it. So yeah, that's a very valuable tangent because you're so right. And it kind of gets into one of the things I really like to explore on this podcast and just in my life in general is how the influences, the societal norms, the cultures, the time periods that we grew up in influence our journey, and especially later in life. And back when we were growing up, that was very much the case. Girls were sort of hovered over, protected more, and boys were like, suck it up. And I think on both ends of those extremes, there could be a great disservice to us kids growing up. I mean, I actually had sort of, I think a little bit of the opposite of that. Like my parents were very much like, get up, dust yourself off, move on, which was great. And I think for me, at least, that whole kind of just get up, quit your crying, pull yourself up, then taught me to disconnect from my emotions and from my pain and from my body and all those things. So it's sort of like I was talking, I think with Suzanne about we swing the pendulum to these extremes. And I think now later in life, it's all about, okay, how do we bring the pendulum kind of back to the middle? So yeah, I think you raise a really valid point there.
Yeah, your experience resonates with me also. Like I had the same thing. Like my mom was very much, stop crying. I'll give you something to cry about.
Yes.
It's like,
God. Yeah.
And, so I learned that I wasn't allowed to cry. And like, I must not be actually feeling what I'm feeling because I'm getting this feedback. That's not a real thing. And it's only, 40 something years later, I'm realizing, no, those feelings of pain and shame and sadness are real. And maybe now I'm starting to deal with them, those repressed emotions. And it's a disservice, but I also want to say she did the best she could given what she knew. Because if you go back a generation before that, like we're looking at people, her parents like lived through war and much harder things, and they didn't have time for emotions because life was hard. And it's kind of this, I've become more interested in the intergenerational aspect of trauma, and just realizing it just gets passed down generation to generation.
Yes.
And until somebody tries to break the chain and recognize, okay, this is how I am passing on patterns I learned as a kid and how I'm going to try to interrupt that. And that's something I'm very intentional about trying to do right now with my kids.
Oh, yeah. I feel like we could do a whole podcast series on all of that, because I think you and I agree that I want to move away from generational blaming. Our parents, again, doing the best that they could with the information that they had available to them and the resources at the time. That's not to excuse behavior. And it's also to recognize that, like, my parents in rural Nebraska, certainly in the 70s and 80s, and even now, didn't have the resources, the teachings, the cultural shifts that we have seen. And so, no, I'm not going to blame or fault them. And that's part of our work, right? As kids, it will be part of your kids' work. It'll be part of their kids' work. Like, kids love to point the finger at the parents and say, like, you did this to me. And while there are a lot of family dynamics that need to be teased out as we get older, and we want to learn, as I said, the impact of things on us as we were growing up, I think it doesn't help us to just constantly point the finger, because that kind of takes our power away and our autonomy now in this moment to choose, okay, well, that happened, yes, and now how do I want to deal with that and respond to it? So yeah, I agree with you. I'm very interested in the intergenerational trauma, how that gets passed down, both from a DNA standpoint and more direct lived experience too. So, and you say, by the way, I wanted to come back to you, you have 2 kids, but you just told me before we hopped on the call, you have a 3rd one on the way in October.
That is true.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's going to be something.
Yeah, it'll be something. That's for sure.
I just turned 50 years old, so it's like, why am I going back to the newborn experience? What am I doing? But it's, my family wanted it, and my wife and I wanted it, like another kid, and so we're going to do it, and we'll figure it out. And I think that's the thing, is that I've learned that if you look at the reasons why you can't do something, you'll find the reasons. If you look for the reasons you can do something, you'll find the reasons. So, like, whatever default you decided, you kind of will find evidence to support it. And so people are like, oh, how could you have a 3rd kid? It's gonna be so much work. There's all this, it's gonna be hard, blah, blah, blah. And yes, there are a lot of reasons why it's hard. And there's a lot of reasons why it's gonna be great. And so one thing I try to do for myself is just choose which I focus on. And yeah, it's such an interesting thing, because our brain is just so good at finding evidence to support whatever we've already decided.
Yep. So. And buying into what other people say about us, and that, again, coming back to societal norms, culture, I don't even like the word norm, but just expectations and stories, that at what age is it appropriate for you to have or not have kids? And at the end of the day, that's a personal decision, and you know what's best. You and your wife know what's best for yourselves and for your family. And honestly, like, I think about it, and I'm like, I'm 52. I'm no way am I having kids. And I'm already not sleeping because of hormones. So, like, might as well just throw a kid in the mix, because you're not sleeping anyway. So this makes sense.
Yeah, we've been joking. So my 3-year-old daughter doesn't sleep well. She wakes up screaming a couple times a night, most nights. And it's like, well, at least we never got in the habit of sleeping again. So, like, it's not going to be that big a deal. It'll be fine.
Right. Just roll with it. No, I have confidence that, as you said, you'll figure it out. Like, it's going to be a journey just like anything, and a beautiful one at that. So I really love that you're just listening to yourselves and to each other, and screw what anybody else thinks or says, because yeah. Well, so we kind of jumped into it, which is awesome. So I want to rewind a little bit, because one of the reasons I was really excited to talk to you is because we've had kind of similar tracks. We both spent a couple of decades in careers that ended up burning us out, and then decided to become coaches. And so you're an executive coach. You spent 25 years in the tech industry and then started your coaching business about 5 years ago. Is that right?
5 years ago, yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Not uncoincidentally, soon after I had my first child.
Yeah.
Related.
Yep. So you could spend more time with your
basically
family.
went on my paternity leave and realized I'd been considering coaching for a while at that point, and I came back and I'm like, yep, it's time. It is time to take the leap and see if I can make this work so that I can be here for my kids when I want to control my own time, which is not easy to do when you're in the corporate life.
No. It's not necessarily easy as an entrepreneur either, but it is easier because your boss tends to be a little more understanding, which is you.
Sometimes my boss sometimes is just like, no, you got to get this done. Like, what are you doing? We don't have time for this.
Yeah. Sometimes I want to file a complaint against my boss, but
yeah,
it is what it is. But so let's rewind just a little bit, because I want to kind of come back to that piece about you growing up and your childhood and sort of what set you up for the trajectory that you were on to be in the tech industry for 25 years, and sort of paint a picture for me. We know you were a self-proclaimed nerd growing up, but tell me a little bit more about what life was like growing up for you in the 70s and 80s, and particularly how you think that might have influenced your journey going forward.
That's a deep question.
We got time.
How much time do we have? Okay, great. We got time.
We got time.
So I grew up in Wheaton, Illinois, which is a suburb about 30 miles west of Chicago. If you've heard of it, you are a fundamentalist Christian, because it is where Wheaton College is, the Harvard of Christian schools, the one of the top colleges for fundamentalist Christians. It's where Billy Graham, the televangelist, went. I grew up playing in the orchestra at the Billy Graham Center for the Performing Arts. Wheaton, Illinois was made famous by Trivial Pursuit, the game, because it was the answer to the question, what town in the U.S. has the most churches per capita? So that's where I grew up. Here's what made that even more entertaining. I wasn't religious, and neither were my parents.
Wait, how did they end up there?
So, it's even more complicated because my mom is Korean. She grew up in Korea. She went to school in Korea and then came to the U.S. for grad school, and then met my dad while they were both in grad school. And they got married, and they had kids, and they moved there because that's where my dad's job was. My mom gave up her job as a research biochemist to raise the kids, because that's what you did in the 70s. And we're growing up in this very white, very Christian, very Republican town when my mom was none of those. She tells the story that when she voted in her first election, a primary election, she was like, I'd like the Democratic ballot. She's like, the person there was like, do we have any of those? Let's go look at the back.
Oh, wow.
After I went off to college, she became a teacher in the local school district, and she was literally the first non-white teacher in the district. So I'm painting that picture because I think it is important for my own journey to recognize, like, I was positioned as an outsider from the start. And there are some ways in which that was hurtful. Like, it was hard for me to belong. It was hard for me to fit in with other kids. It didn't help that when I was 6 years old, my dad got a chant at a big overseas assignment in Korea because he wanted to bring us back to my mom's, country. But like 6 years old is when you make a lot of friends. And like we were pulled up and moved to this country where I don't speak the language. I don't look like anybody else. And, they did the best they could. They put me in the English school and, I survived, but it was like, come back 2 years later, everybody's like forward into their friendships and they have their best friends. And like, even though I had been there before, like now I'm not part of the groups anymore. So that was tough. I didn't realize quite how tough until I went into therapy in my 40s, but we'll put that aside for now.
Yeah, we'll come back to that.
Yeah. But I think the reason I share all this is the advantage it gave me is because I was the outsider. I had a way of I had to learn to bridge the gap. I had to learn to understand my own perspective and understand the perspective of the people around me, to understand, okay, how do I fit in to this culture? How do I figure out how to belong with the people that are not like me? And that has turned out to be, there's a saying that from the wound comes the gift.
Yep.
And so that wound of not belonging meant I have this gift of being able to fit in. I have this gift of understanding different perspectives. I have this gift of being able to connect across people that don't understand each other. And that's turned out to be my superpower in my career throughout all my different jobs. We're going to talk about all the different jobs I've had, but that's been one of my superpowers I've used in all of my jobs, is understanding how do I take the perspective and connect to it and then help that person see a different perspective. So I'll stop there and we can go where you want.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing that, by the way, because that's just really hitting in a lot of places for me, and I imagine for other folks too, because there aren't a lot of people that I talk to, interestingly enough, who have that kind of, I call it almost a chameleon experience. I don't know if that word lands for you or not, but I certainly mirror that experience. And I was a white girl growing up in rural Nebraska in a predominantly white town. And so my kind of bridging the gap came more from the classism, even in a small town. And so I think it's important to reflect on, as you talked about, you reflect on these things as we get older and we go into therapy, because we're like, why isn't my life going the way I want it to go? Oh, it's all this childhood shit. Like, as I have started to unpack that a little bit more, the systems that we grew up in that are oppressive in different ways, whether we're talking about racism or gender or class, whatever it might be, those all have ways of making us feel other, like we don't fit in. And so for those of us who experience that, we grew up thinking that we needed to try and kind of fit in a little bit everywhere, as you said, kind of bridge the gap, which I really love that. And I find it exhausting. Did you ever feel exhausted by that?
Well, it's absolutely exhausting. And I'll connect it to something else, which is capitalism. Late stage capitalism encourages this, because the one way to know you fit in is to earn money and to be productive. So a lot of us learn, well, I don't know how to fit in with other people, but I know I can produce. I know I can, do stuff and like jump through hoops for other people. And we lean into that, and that gets us a long way until we burn out, as previously mentioned. But there's another quip I heard at one point that Silicon Valley is an engine for turning anxiety disorders into productivity. And I thought it was kind of a joke, but it's kind of a way, way, way too close to the truth. Just everybody here is so insecure and so anxious, and these systems are designed to extract productivity from that combination.
It's funny because it's true. That is why. Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm curious, at what point do you think you realized that this ability for you to kind of fit in anywhere and bridge that gap was a real superpower?
It's funny because it's like both a superpower and a kryptonite, because it's like, because I'm working to fit in everywhere, I don't actually belong someplace where I can relax and be myself. So yes, I don't want people to say like, oh, that sounds great. It's like that there's a downside to it. And it's going to be, I think, I started to get hints of it early in my career. I was working as a software engineering consultant, and I would listen to my customers and figure out what they needed. And one of my customers at one point said something like, "Eric, it's so frustrating because you never give me what I ask for, but it's always what I need." Yeah. Because he would say, "I want you to build this." And be like, "Wait, why do you want that?" And he'd explain the problem he was actually trying to solve. And he was giving me the solution he wanted me to build. And I'm like, "That's a terrible solution. Here, I'm going to solve your actual problem and build you something to solve this." because I could understand what he was actually trying to do underneath the surface and give him that. And at the time, I didn't know that was unusual at the time. I'm like, well, that's just, you just listen, you figure out what they need and you give it to them. But it turns out most people don't do that. They actually just build what they're told to build. And then everybody gets unhappy. So,
Yep.
So that was probably the first hint. And then when I got to Google, I was in a finance analyst role. And I was on an interesting team doing revenue forecasting and analysis. So we had a couple like PhD quantitative analysts who do these amazing, like sophisticated analyses. And they'd be in the room with like the VPs of Google trying to understand what the hell they said. And it just became this joke that like the PhDs would say something and all the VPs would turn and look at me to translate. Like, what did they just say? In words that we understand. Because I had that training. I'd been in a PhD program in physics. I understood the numerical stuff. I understood what they were trying to say. And I could put it in terms that the executives they're like, oh, I get what you're trying to say now. And do it in a way that it didn't offend the PhDs. They're like, yeah, that's basically right. Because what often happens is that you simplify it to the point where they're like, no, that's wrong. And they get defensive. So that was kind of a moment of like, oh yeah, this is a really powerful tool that I can be this person that communicates across those gaps.
You're like a synthesizer.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I had somebody tell me that the other day, and I've kind of realized that over the last couple of years myself, that I love to synthesize, whether it's in, again, bridging that gap between people and conversations, or whether it's just in like reading books and knowledge and trying to pull all these pieces together and synthesize everything. And it is a gift and it's exhausting. And do you feel like you are a pretty empathetic or highly sensitive person?
Well, first of all, on the synthesis part, I just want to say, yes, I think at one point I took the Gallup Strengths Finder, and like I think my top or second top strength was like something like collector, basically. Like I mean, it's accumulate stuff. And I mean, you can, if you're watching video, you can see behind me, I've got like 1,000 books behind me because that's what I do. So yes, that very much resonates with me. Yeah, it's funny. The highly sensitive thing was something that I discovered only a few years ago, and I'm like, whoa, why does this describe my life so well? And all those people that said, oh, you're too sensitive. Oh, why is this? Like I would just get overwhelmed. I didn't know why. And I just would beat myself up. Like, why can't I enjoy bars like other people? Like, yeah, no, they're just not a good fit for who I am. So yes, I and the empathetic part, like I wouldn't have said I was empathetic for most of my life, but I've heard now there's kind of like two forms of empathy. Like there's cognitive empathy, and that's the part I was really good at. I understand what you're trying to get at. I understand that translation thing we were talking about. And then there's like the emotional empathy of like really feeling what other people are feeling. And that part was a little later to come online. That's something I've been working on for myself to really feel what other people are feeling. So like thinking what how other people think, I learned how to do that very early on in life. But to your point about the repressing the emotions and saying like pushing them away as a child, that meant I didn't know how to feel my own feelings, let alone feel other people's feelings. So that's been something I've been working on over the last few years.
Yeah, I think that last piece is particularly true for men and those who identify as men in the United States, particularly in other westernized cultures, because I was just listening to something on Instagram, something came up on my feed this morning. It was a Black man talking about how men in general have never been taught or encouraged, which we all know and hear, to really be in touch with their emotions because they've been taught that it's something to be ashamed of because you don't want to be like a girl, and all those toxic messages that we got a lot of growing up in the 70s and 80s. And so it makes total sense that that empathetic piece doesn't come online until later for a lot of men, because again, they haven't been taught or encouraged that not only is that okay, but that's how you really fully embrace your humanity, And so I really appreciate you sharing that and what you're talking about too, in terms of the gender differences between boys and girls when they're young, and how the boys are like, nope, just dust yourself off. Don't cry about it at all. Don't let anybody see you cry. And then how that impacts us later in life. So yeah, I'm really glad that you mentioned that.
Yeah, I mean, it's not only not encouraged. I mean, it's as you said, actively discouraged. And
Yeah.
I won't use the epithets that were used when I was a kid, but that like you didn't want to be gay, you didn't want to be a
Yep.
girl,
Yep.
so you figured out how to suck it up and keep going. So,
Yep.
but yeah,
Yeah.
it's been. I mean, and you made a point earlier about like the resources we have now that we didn't, that my parents didn't, and nobody knew. Like, when I was in the depths of my burnout, I was fortunate to read Brene Brown's Daring Greatly, which talks about being wholehearted and how you can't have the highs without the lows. And it was really impactful to me to go like, oh, I'm missing something here. I'm like operating this narrow band, which is safe because it protects me from the lows. Whoops. But it also is keeping me from having the connection and the love and the joy that I'm seeking. And so that was kind of a pivotal moment for me in terms of like, but yeah, like our parents don't know anything about that. Like that's
Yeah.
relatively recent research. That's recent explanation. And I'm just fortunate that we have it. I'm just, I guess, glad that we have it.
Yeah. I want to like freeze frame what you just said because I think that's a really important takeaway, especially for people of our generation who are sort of coming to all of this more wholehearted way of life, later on in our life compared to younger generations now. And the reason I want to favorite and kind of freeze frame that is because I kind of look at people and life as three layers. We have like a top layer, which is a lot of the very toxic positivity, kind of superficial layer where people are like, life is great, ignorance is bliss, like we don't care about anything, it's all good. And
Mm-hmm.
that can feel really great because you are just living in that toxic positivity land. And then the deeper layer is when shit goes wrong, when something happens, like the heavier emotions, the more challenging situations, which a lot of people want to just completely ignore. They don't want to be sad or angry or depressed or disappointed, any of those things. So
Mm-hmm.
they ignore it and they stay up in that top superficial layer. The
Mm-hmm.
invitation is that if you can have the tools and resources and coaches and therapists and people in your corner to support you through that, to go through those darker, challenging emotions and times, you actually come out to like this third layer, which is so much better and deeper and more joyous than that top
Mm-hmm.
superficial layer of toxic positivity, because it is that whole human, wholehearted layer where you're like, oh, I
Mm.
know what true joy, true happiness is now because I was really sad. I was really unhappy. And so I just want people to digest that message because I think so many Gen Xers are like, I'm good. Life is fine. It's supposed to suck. I'm supposed to hate my job. Like my kids are supposed to drive me crazy. I'm supposed to be, getting out of shape and unhealthy. Like that's just the way life is. I'm like, no, that's just you live in like one little superficial layer of your life. So yeah. Whew. Okay. I'm getting
Yeah.
so excited. Like we're getting into some good stuff here. So yeah, thank you so much for
Yeah.
just shining a light on all that.
Yeah. No, I hadn't heard that three layers, but I like that. There's this idea that, yeah, life is supposed to be easy. It's like, actually, no. Like that's not, I mean, you can try to make your life easy, but part of what makes life satisfying, at least for me, is like doing hard things and showing that I can do hard things. And there's maybe dealing with difficult emotions, maybe taking on a hard project that I might fail. But then it feels so good when I succeed. If you only do what you know you can do, like, I don't know, it's like participation trophies, which we rightly make fun of.
Yeah. Yep. I agree.
um, so yeah, I think that's one of these pernicious myths that like, oh, the point of life is to like be happy and make things easy. It's like, I don't believe that. I think there's something more to life of struggling for something that you think is important. And I think most people agree. Like nobody would become a parent if they just wanted their life to be easy. And yet people do it because there's some meaning there. Every year, it's like the research is pretty clear, and you just have to watch parents to see like it's not easy. It's hard. It's tiring. It's miserable. Not miserable, but like it is not. It is not like every moment is happy. Like they've done research. Like parents are, if you ask them on a day-to-day basis, are less happy but they don't regret their choices at all because they're like, yeah,
Yep.
my life is more meaningful.
Yeah.
And I think that applies to more than just parent.
Yeah, that's really beautiful. So you were this kind of nerdy intellectual kid growing up in very white, very conservative Midwest Illinois. How did you end up going into the tech industry all the way out in California? Paint that journey for me.
Well, I mean, again, my mom being Korean believed very strongly in academics. Like that was what mattered. She was very focused on me getting into a top college from probably when I was like 3 years old. So
Thanks,
she
Mom.
was like, yeah. So, I got into MIT and that's where I went. Um, and yeah, it's funny. My mom, uh, after I got an MIT and my sister got into Northwestern, she started a course in our local district of like how to get your child into an Ivy League school, because she was like,
I
that was
love
all
your
me.
mom.
I did that.
That is awesome. Did people
Like, yeah.
enroll in her course? Like,
I mean, it wasn't like a paid course, but like she would offer it. Like she was the president of the PTA and all that kind of stuff. So, she was like, if you want hit tips on how to get your kids into these elite colleges, like I've done, it was much harder. Like all this stuff wasn't available on the internet then. So like she had figured it out and she'd like done research and talked to all her Korean friends and figured out what needed to happen and what activities you needed to do and all the stuff that's now like everybody knows. But again, back in the 80s,
back then,
this wasn't common knowledge. So yeah, I got to MIT. And I was like, oh, okay, there are sane people in the world. I'm like, I am not like, I have to say this. Like when I was in high school, there were debates in my high school about creationism versus evolution. And I was literally the only person on the evolution side. Even the biology teacher was on the creationism side. I'm like, okay, wait, like what is happening? Like I have read all these books from the library. I'm pretty sure I'm right, but nobody agrees with me. And then I got to him, I just like, oh, okay, here are the people that agree with me.
you found your people.
I found some people that actually I can belong with. So that was a big moment for me. And then from there I got my MIT degree. I went on to grad school at Stanford. I majored in physics, so I went to Stanford for physics. And part of the reason I went to California was I still remember this, like my senior year of MIT, I'm doing, campus visits to visit the places I'd gotten admitted to. And it's like a cold, rainy, miserable winter in Boston. I get on the plane. I go to Stanford. It's 80 degrees. It's sunny. There's palm trees. People are playing volleyball on the lawn. I'm like, I'm just coming here. I don't care. Like this is where I'm in. I'm done with winter. This is going to be good. And so that's where I went. And then, the way I got in the tech industry was after 3 years of grad school, it was pretty clear I didn't actually want to get a PhD in physics, and I didn't want to spend the rest of my life researching physics. So I was kind of miserable, but I didn't know what to do. But fortunately, it was 1998. I knew how to program computers. Anybody that knew how to like make computers do what they wanted was getting a job. And so a friend of mine was like, hey, you know how to program computers? Do you want to come work for me? I'm like, I don't know. I've been set on being a physicist my whole life. I don't know if I can stop that. He's like, well, I'll offer you this amount of money. At the time, it was like, 4 times what I was making as a grad student. And how about you do a leave of absence? I'm like, yeah, okay, I could do that. So I took a year-long leave of absence and never went back.
That's so cool. What was that first job with the computer programming?
It was a software consulting job.
Okay.
It was somebody I knew through MIT. So that was, that's one of those old boys network kind of moments of He knew who I was. He trusted me. A buddy of mine was already working for him. And they said, yeah, Eric's smart. Even if he doesn't know it, he'll figure it out. So I got that job. And from there, one job led to another.
Yeah. How did you end up at Google ultimately?
Yeah. So Google was a place I'd always, everybody knew about Google at that point. But I wasn't a good enough software engineer to get into Google. I knew that. So I never even applied. But I had this experience in my second job, I guess, was at a biotech startup that had a great engineering team, but and raised a lot of money based on what we were producing, and then went bankrupt. And that was really frustrating for me because I was like, we are delivering everything we said we were delivering, and the company went bankrupt. What am I missing? Turns out there's this whole business model thing that needs to be taken care of. Turns out we had a terrible CEO, terrible leadership. And it was a really impactful moment for me because I was like, oh, it doesn't matter how good of an engineer I am if management is terrible. And so that got me interested in business. It got me interested in management and leadership. I call it my origin story as an executive coach because I was like, oh, this is why this matters. So I went back and got a master's degree in technology management, which is like an MBA for tech people. And one of my professors said something very impactful. He said, if you want to understand how executives think, you have to understand the money. I was like, I don't understand the money. Never thought about the money. I never thought about profit and loss, never like none of that stuff. And so over that master's degree, I learned more about like how to read a profit and loss statement, how to understand putting things in monetary terms, and understanding strategy and using the language of MBAs. And then I was looking for a job after I got my master's, and again through the MIT network, actually, I saw a job for a revenue forecasting analyst. And I was like, I bet if I'm the one analyzing and forecasting revenue, I will really understand the money. And I got the job in part because I had this physics background. So like, oh, you're a quantitative guy and you're a tech guy that could like speak the language of our executives. Great. We can use that.
Bridging that gap again.
Bridging the gap again. But again, I was lucky because the hiring manager, like I didn't fit the qualifications on the actual job description. He was looking for like an MBA, consulting background, 3 years of experience kind of stuff. And like, here I am coming in with like zero business experience, but engineering experience and analysis experience. He's like, yeah, I'd like, I actually have a couple MBAs already. You're going to be interesting for me. Like, let's figure out how I can see how I'll use you. So I got a lucky break there. But yeah, turns out understanding the money, critical, and got me into some very interesting places. By which I mean 6 months after I started that job, I was regularly presenting to Eric Schmidt, Larry, Sergey, Patrick Pichette, and standing in front of them, telling them, here's what revenue is doing. They would ask me questions. This was 2009, so we're in the middle of the Great Recession. And they're like, what's going to happen with revenue? What's going to happen with the economy? I'm like, how the hell should I know? But like, I was the expert in the company by that point because I'd spent more time thinking about revenue than anybody else. So I was the one standing in front of them. And that gave me exposure to the executive level that never would have gotten if I'd been an engineer or a product manager. So that was it was this huge accelerant to my career, and then later on led to me becoming chief of staff for the search ads team at Google because I knew all the guys running the search ads team, and I did that for about 6 years. And then after that, that's when I pivoted to become an executive coach.
So what in that 25-year tech career, what do you think really was the impetus, if you can identify one? What was sort of leading up to the burnout that you started experiencing?
I mean, I don't think it was anything it was more that we'd already talked about the childhood impulses of like the way to find belonging is to exceed expectations. Go get that straight A, go get the gold star, go get the extra credit, all that kind of stuff. Through most of my first 10 years of my career, that was still a valid strategy. Like I could actually, here's expectations, I could go meet them, I could exceed them, I could do that. And it worked. I got promoted, I got new jobs, I got offers. It was an effective strategy. So I kept doing it. I think what changed was at Google was different than most places. Because it was like, it was kind of one of those things like, okay, here's what we expect you to do. Hit this high bar. Once you hit it, I'm like, okay, I got it. I figured it out. I'm kind of on, they're like, great, you figured that out? Here's the next bar. Go do that. I'm like, ooh, okay, I can do that. Oh, you got that under control? Okay, great. We'll give you some more. Like every time I hit the bar, they would give me more. It was like, it made sense. Like this guy's competent, give him more stuff to do. But I had never learned how to say no. I had never learned to say enough. And so 3 years into Google, I'm working 8 a.m. to midnight every day. I'm told this is what I have to do to get my next promotion. My manager's like, hey, you need to get this done and this done and this done. And I'm like, okay, yeah, whatever you say, I will do whatever my manager says because that's how you get promotion and I have to get promoted. Notice those have tos. That's what trapped me. I was like, I don't see a way out because I have to do whatever my manager says. I have to go get that promotion. And that's what led to me just destroying my body. Like literally in Christmas 2011, I got through all the tasks that we had to get through by the end of the year, got to Christmas Day and just collapsed. Like in bed, 103-degree fever, like did not get out of bed basically for a week because my body was completely destroyed. What was unusual for me is somewhere in that week, I had this crazy thought. What if I didn't have to get that promotion? What if I said no to more work? And I was like, "Ooh, I don't know what that voice like. That's weird." But I was in such a low spot that I listened to it, and I went into my manager in January, and I was like, "I'm not going to work that hard anymore." And they were like, "What do you mean?" I'm like, "I can't do this. I can't keep going at this rate." And they're like, "Well, if you can't do the work, you're not getting that promotion." I'm like, that's okay. I don't need the promotion. And they're like, if you can't handle the work, I'll find somebody that can. It's like, okay, that's, because I was ready to quit. So it's like, if you need to fire me, that's fine. I'm at the point where that would be okay. So they took away half my team, slashed my performance rating, and the world didn't end. That was the weird part.
Where do you think that voice came from to invite you to not care about the promotion, not care about hitting that next bar?
I don't know. I mean, I think part of it was just the I'm ready to quit part of it. Like, okay, I'm ready to quit anyway. What's the worst that can happen? They fire me? Great. That gets me out of this. So there's partly that. Oh, the other thing was I was recently discovered I had been to a Seth Godin workshop that in October, November that year, like a 3-day workshop with Seth Godin, who, for those that don't know, is like a marketing guru, but he's also one of those people that's very, very motivational of like, take control. You can choose what you do, choose where you spend your time, choose what's important, and let go of the other stuff. Like, do the work that's important. And I wonder, like, I'd never made this connection, but I wonder if there was some of that, his voice in my head during that time.
Yeah.
Like, wait, why are you doing this? This isn't important work. And you're killing yourself doing stuff that's dumb.
Unconscious seed planting going on there that,
Quite possibly.
You started to hear those little whispers. Yeah.
So it might have been a combination of those, or it might have been just my inner self going like, yeah, that's enough. We're done. Time to stop.
Do you think it took you getting to a place where your health was really suffering to help that light bulb turn on for you?
I think so, at least for me. I hope it doesn't have to work that way for everybody to hit that kind of low point.
Yeah.
But for me, I was so culturally wired to do whatever it took to, ignore my own pain and suffering and say, like, well, I'm fine. That you talked about that top layer of toxic positivity. Like, I'm fine. I can handle it. I got this. This is no problem. I was doing that. And I think only by having my physical body collapse was I able to go like, ooh, I'm not fine. I'm not okay.
Do you think there were whispers or hints before that looking back, you didn't know were hints, like the universe tapping you on the shoulder, trying to get your attention, and finally it like slapped you in the face, or we're going to knock you down for a week, and so you'll finally listen to it?
Oh, there are lots of hints.
It's funny how we just ignore those. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I mean, people are like, my housemates are like, wow, you're like a workaholic. I'm like, I'm not a workaholic. I've never worked hard in my life. Like, I've been, I was the kid that getting straight A's without studying. Like, in my first jobs, I just kind of did what it took and, exceeded expectations without really working that hard. And so it's like, you're a workaholic. I'm like, no, there's no evidence I'm a workaholic. They're like, the evidence is that you're working 100 hours a week. But it's to me, the difference was like a workaholic is somebody that works no matter what. Like that was clearly not true. Like I was not a workaholic, but I was somebody that couldn't allow myself to fail, which was slightly different, but ended up with the same result. And people were giving me more stuff to do, as I mentioned, and that meant I had to do more. And I thought it was important work. Like, it was pretty cool. Like, the CFO at Google is calling me up and asking me for things. It was a cool opportunity. And like, people are like, oh, do you regret it? I'm like, actually, no. Like, I got connections. I earned credibility during that time that's really set up the rest of my career in a really profound way. So, that's part of why I did it. It's like, man, these important people are asking me to do things and I don't want to say no. So I did it. And it had a cost.
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
Like
well, and you said,
yeah,
you said something really critical there that comes back to what we were talking about earlier, in that failure wasn't an option. You didn't say no, because if you had said no, that meant you, quote, failed. And that just wasn't an option, because you'd never, being the nerdy kid, the high achiever growing up, you didn't know what it looked like to fail. And so that pattern just repeated itself into the workaholic lifestyle that you created, which I find so fascinating that you didn't associate working 100 hours a week with being a workaholic. Was that something, did you feel proud of that at the time?
I wasn't proud of it, but it was like, I knew workaholics. I knew people that worked 100 hours a week no matter what. Like, that was not me. And so I was like, well, I'm not that.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, that's part of why, like you said, like, the oblivious to the hints. Like, yeah, if your friends are telling you you're a workaholic, if at one point I went on a date with a woman and she was like, yeah, we went on a few dates. She was like, I really like you, but you work all the time. And like, that's not going to work for me. I'm like, but I really like you. She's like, yeah, but like literally, oh, okay, well, you don't get it. So yeah, I had the hints at the time. Doing the work was more important to me than listening to those hints. And then at some point it flipped. Well, it flipped when I was lying in bed.
Yeah. I had an interview with Dr. Adia Gooden on the podcast, and we talked about workaholism, especially with respect to Gen Xers. And of course, this is prevalent in every generation, but focusing just on Gen Xers. And what she highlighted, just as you're highlighting here, is that underneath that workaholism, whatever reason you're doing it, is a notion that I'm not enough. I'm not going to be enough. I'm not going to produce enough. Just that not enoughness, which is all a lack of self-worth and belief in yourself and your worthiness, independent of your numbers, your hours, your productivity, whatever it might be. And so I think that's really important to note, because we talk about it a lot in the context of women and those who identify as women. It also shows up in men too.
Yeah.
I think that gets overlooked. Men can feel like they're not enough too. And that kind of comes back to everything that we talked about not being in touch with the emotions. So I appreciate you sharing that story, because I think there might be a lot of dudes who are like, oh, that's me too. You mean working 60, 70, 80 hours a week isn't how I have to prove my worth as a man? So
yeah, it is such a trap for men. It's like, and especially again, if you're at this positive layer kind of thing, it's like, I can do it. Like and saying a no to something means I can't do it. And those are the only options. I can do it or I can't do it. And it wasn't until I had my burnout that I was like, there's a third option, which is I won't do it. I can do it, but I won't do it. And that just had never occurred to me. That was an option. And it's kind of ridiculous to say now, but yeah, it just never occurred to me. I was like, either you can or you can't. And if you can't, you're a failure. So like, I have to say I can do it. It's really interesting where that comes from. Like, if you can do it, you should do it.
I love that third option. I won't do it, because it's not this binary, I have to do it, I can do it, whatever it is. It's no, I won't do it anymore. That sounds like that was really empowering. How long were you at Google?
I was at Google a little over 10 years in total.
Okay.
But that breakdown happened roughly 3 years in.
Okay. Oh, wow. So you stayed quite a while after that still. That's a good lesson, because coming back to something you said earlier about how, I went in, I said no, not doing the promotion. They gave me a bad performance rating. They took away half my team, all of that. And you still lasted 7 years. And I think for so many people, they don't say no because of the fear of what will happen if they say no. And look, at the end of the day, you were still there 7 years and nothing that bad really happened.
Yeah, I had a lot of luck in that. But it was a function of the work I'd already done. So I mentioned had become the go-to revenue analyst at the company, and the people that the VPs in charge of search ads had trusted, because they went to me for 3 years to know what's happening with their business. And so after that conversation with my manager, obviously lost by half my team, I'm pretty miserable. I'm starting to look around for a new job. And I complained to a friend of mine that I'd worked with previously, yeah, I'm not quite sure what it is. I'm not there's nothing really here in the finance team that seems like a good fit. I don't know where else I would fit at Google. Maybe I'll look for outside of Google. Maybe it's time for me to leave and do something else. And again, matter of luck, that the person I complained to was the wife of one of those VPs of ads. And he'd been looking for a new chief of staff that understood his business. And so she basically turned around and said, hey, you've been looking for a chief of staff. Would Eric be a good fit? She's like, oh my God, Eric knows my business. He understands everything about it. He'd be amazing. Is he available? She's like, yes. And I got an email the next day. Hey, would you be interested? Let's talk. I'm like, what's happening? And people say, people used to have to go, how do you become a chief of staff like this? I'm like, I don't think you do it the way I did, which is complaining to a coworker. That's not how it works. But, the more accurate answer is I'd put in the work. I'd put in 3 years of building relationships, of showing my credibility, of delivering on what I promised I would do. And I built a reputation. I built a brand. And people then knew that, wanted to work with me. And so that's what got me that job. It's not just that I happened to complain. It's just that I put 3 years of work into building a relationship and a credibility that got me that job. And I think that's the part that's really hard to believe in when you're in these down moments, especially when you have a manager that doesn't believe in you, that doesn't have your back, that doesn't want to support you. It's hard to believe that somebody else will. And if you've done the work, if you have the talent, if you have the credibility, there will be somebody else that.
Yeah, I'm going to totally reframe that for you in typical coaching fashion, because what I do not hear in that is luck, actually. I can see why you would say it's luck. And as you said, you positioned yourself over the years of doing good quality work, and yes, working too much, but just of who you were. And I actually want to give you some props for, quote, complaining, which I really see as being vulnerable and venting to somebody. Because had you not done that, had you just kind of suffered in silence, she would have never known that you were miserable and wanted to leave. So I give you a lot more credit for that job switch than you want to give yourself credit for.
No, I appreciate the framing. And I think that is very true. If I hadn't been willing to share what I was going through, it wouldn't have happened. And this was just after I read the Brene Brown book. So I was in the mode of I need to share more, I need to open up more, be more vulnerable. So it was not a coincidence that it happened around then. So, but yeah, it is, there's always aspects of luck, and there's things you can do to bias it. If you let people know what you're looking for, it turns out they're more able to help you than if you keep it all inside. And that's something, I tell my clients now, and they're like, well, I don't know what I want. Go talk to 20 people. They're like, well, what if they don't have what I want? You'll learn better what you want by trying to explain it to others. And you never know. All it takes is one person that has a connection, that's looking for something to be like you, that's going to get you that next opportunity. So, when my clients are stuck, I'm like, go talk to somebody. That's just my go-to answer. Just go talk to somebody. It'll make it better.
That's awesome advice. Really. I was perusing your website, and saw a couple things on there that I wanted to ask you about, which I assume is fair game because it's on your website.
Sure. I'm an open book. Go for it.
Yeah, yeah. And one of the topics that I wanted to ask you about is that you had actually been fired from one of the startups that you were working at. And the reason I wanted to ask specifically about that is that there's a lot of folks of our generation now who are being laid off or fired. There's a lot of ageism going on, just a lot of other reasons that they're being laid off or fired or kind of cast aside. So I'm wondering if you can share what you learned from that experience of being fired, and if there are any words of wisdom that you could give to other Gen Xers who might be going through something like that now too.
It's a good catch about that. And I didn't learn the right lessons from being fired.
So let's share what not to do if you're fired.
So this is the context I failed to add about getting to Google. Was I'd just been fired from my previous job at the startup, and that's when I got to Google. But I had just been let go and told, you're not good enough, basically. We don't want you around. You're not a part of the future of this company. So all the workaholism, all the I have to succeed no matter what, was the response, which what I learned. Like, oh, I have to do whatever I'm asked for. I have to succeed no matter what, because I was just laid off when I didn't do what I was told to do. So, or not laid off, I was fired. I was flat out fired. The company was growing and I got fired. So I had learned, like, yep, if you disagree with your manager, you will get fired. So I did whatever my manager told me. And so that was a lesson I learned. It turned out not to be also, you talked before the binary and the overcompensating. Like I was on this end, like I can do what I want and I'm so good that they'll figure it out. And in that case, I had a CEO that did not agree with what I wanted to do, did not think I had good ideas. We had various other personality conflicts, and he just fired me. It's like, yeah, you're not part of the future of this company. I'm like, oh, okay, well then I better go all the way to the other extreme of doing whatever a manager says, no matter what, even if I think it's a bad idea, because I'm not going through that again. So I'd forgotten about that connection, but yes, that is what I learned was not a healthy response.
Well, and I'm so glad you shared that though, because a pretty, I have to imagine, common response, whether you were fired or not promoted or demoted or whatever it might be, to have that pendulum swing all the way to the other side, to say to ourselves, well, I better totally make up for whatever it is I lack so that doesn't ever happen again. And so I love that you highlighted that huge 180, because neither extreme, like on the one extreme, I hear this, like, I kind of walk on water. You should do what I'm so great. Like do what I think you should do. A little bit of entitlement to, oh dear God, I have to prove myself every chance I get. And there's a happy medium in that. So I'm glad I asked that, because it's a pretty fascinating backstory.
I had forgotten about that connection, but yeah, you talk about the workaholism. That's where it came from. Was like, before I've been working like 40 hours a week and doing whatever I wanted and delivering enough. I was like, I'm delivering enough. It doesn't matter. I don't have to work harder than this. And we'll discover that was not the case. And so I responded by becoming a workaholic, I guess.
Yeah. Oh, like in hindsight, to look back at that path and to see it so clearly now. Of course, you don't see it when you're in it, right? You just see it as, well, I'm protecting myself against ever being fired again. And then, as we talked about, the universe, whatever you believe in, body, all of it lets you know, nope, that's not going to work for you anymore. So,
yeah.
So how old were you? If you started your business 5 years ago, you were about 45 when you decided just to exit, break the golden handcuffs and start your own business. What was behind that ultimate decision to do that? Yeah.
So the decision was actually 3 years before that, around when I was 42, I guess. And I'd already kind of started being a little not just uncomfortable, but like deciding I was ready for something new. I'd been in my job as a chief of staff for like 4 years at that point. I was very good at it. I got it done, but it wasn't very satisfying. It wasn't very meaningful. At the end of the day, my job was to generate more billions of dollars for Google. Like that was my job, make Google richer. And, there's I was defending it like, well, Google does good things with the money. It like gives all this stuff away for free because our product makes so much money. But that wasn't so satisfying. But the particular instigator in this case was that I broke my neck. I was in a bike accident. I was going down a hill at about 30 miles an hour, whipped around a corner, hit a bump in the road, flew off the handlebars, broke my neck. I was fine, didn't get paralyzed, not dead, but I was in a neck brace for 4 months and was about that close to either of those possibilities. And again, I'm extreme. I guess I have to go to a life-threatening kind of moments to make a change. But that really made me go like, is this what I want to do with my life? Is this what I want on my tombstone or my obituary? And the answer is no. So in 2016, I started looking around like, what do I want to do? And I looked at the other options at Google. I'm like, no, not looking great. I looked at other companies, not really feeling great. And I started kind of thinking like, what are the things I want to be known for? What is the thing the activities that give me meaning, that give me purpose? I kept coming back to this idea of like helping other people see new possibilities. Because that's what I didn't have when I was burning out, when I was stuck. I didn't have anybody say like, hey, there's a third option here. It's not can or can't, it's you won't. You have a choice. Not unsurprisingly, the name of my book. I didn't feel like I had choices in that moment. And if I'd had somebody that had told me, hey, there's some possibilities here you're not considering. Here's some things, here's a perspective you don't have yet. So I shared that with a friend and they're like, that's called coaching. Have you considered being a coach? Like, wait, that's a thing? You can go do that? They're like, yes, you could go do that. I'm like, oh. So the seed was planted at that point. But it was a 3-year process for me because like you mentioned the golden handcuffs. I was making a lot of money. I was pretty safe. So it wasn't like, okay, I figured out what I'm going to do. I'm going to quit and just go do it. I did a much more incremental approach. So first, I offered coaching to my friends and family. I'm like, hey, I want to do this. Does anybody want to get some free coaching mentoring for me? A bunch of people said yes. I was like, oh, I really like this. I'm good at this. I'm helping people. This is great. Step 1. Step 2, interviewed some professional coaches. Like when you reach out to 5 or 6 people, said, hi, you have this really cool job. How do I become like you? And they were all very generous, shared their time, shared their thoughts. And they're like, you should go get trained and certified. Even if you're a natural, it'll help. Do you need some structure? It'll be good for you. So I enrolled in a coaching program. It's from an institute called New Ventures West. That was a year-long process in 2017. And it just reinforced, like, I love this. I want to do this. This is great. I want to do this for the rest of my life. But still, there's this money thing that's important. So after I got certified, I went and started a coaching business on the side. Like, let me go see if people will actually pay me to do this. Am I offering enough value that people will give me money? And the answer was yes. And so then, once I got to like 4 or 5 clients and they were referring other people to me, I'm like, okay, I've like checked all the boxes. I know I like doing this. I know I can make money doing this. And most importantly, I got my wife that was an okay thing for me to do. I got my wife to agree to it. And then fourthly, then my son was born. It's like, okay, so I've proven the concept. I have proof of concept. I have savings in the bank in case it goes wrong. That was the other part. I saved up to make sure, like, okay, I've got a year and a half to make this work. If it's not working in a year, I will go find a job. And I took the leap. I took my 3 months of paternity leave on Google's dime first, and then I came back and gave notice.
Good choice.
Like, I put in 10 years here. They can afford to pay me 3 months.
Yeah. Good call on that.
That was the that's how that happened. But I share that in part because a lot of people think like, oh, once I have an idea what my passion is, I just quit and go for it. And I don't think that doesn't have to be that way. You can just there's a lot of incremental steps you can take to explore the path before you make the big leap. And I think it's just so important to recognize, especially that last one of like, will people pay me to do this? It's important to recognize that. Like, am I unique enough? Am I differentiated enough to actually get paid to do this? Because if you can't do that, it's not a business. It's a great hobby. A lot of people do coaching as a hobby. But if you're going to make it a business, you have to position yourself as somebody unique, differentiated, offering something else than the other thousands or millions of coaches.
All comes back to the marketing, finding your niche, your gifts, which, as you said before, our gifts kind of come from our wounds too, which is part of what I hear in your story, that part of your wounding, not to be dramatic about it, but your wounding was that journey through that career that was causing the burnout, that really didn't light you up, is what I'm hearing in that. And I want to come back to that in a second. And so from that, you're now doing this business where you're helping people to find what you didn't find. So I want to, again, kind of freeze frame a couple of things you said there that I think are so important. First of all, I wasn't aware that you'd had that bike accident, or if you told me, I forgot my 52-year-old haze. But that is such a powerful example, again, with the universe literally putting a speed bump in your way to say, I'm going to get your attention, excuse me, and make you reflect on your current situation. Because the second thing that you said that really landed for me is that it didn't sound like, and correct me if I'm wrong, but it didn't sound like at the time you were like really miserable. You just more sort of knew that this doesn't light me up. It's not really kind of what I want to be known for, but it's the golden handcuffs. It's paying the bills. Am I hearing that correctly?
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, it was fine. Like,
yeah,
there were parts of my job I liked. There were parts that I didn't like. They paid me a lot of money. I had a good reputation at that point. It was like, I could keep doing this. Like, it's fine.
Yeah. Yeah. Which I think is so common. And that's why I kind of wanted to freeze frame that a little bit, is because that's where a lot of people live in this sort of what some of us say in the coaching world is like this low grade fever. I'm fine. I don't feel great. It's just something's kind of going on below the surface. I don't really know what it is. It's that low grade fever, which you won't know that you have a low grade fever until something literally knocks you on your ass or over the head or whatever it is. And you're like, oh, fine is not where it's at. Fine is not good enough. Right. And so I just want to, I want people to hear that message that if they're going through life, like, it's fine. Kind of back to what we were talking about before, like, it's supposed to suck. Like, nobody's supposed to be really happy in their job, right? No, that's not the message here.
I love that you brought that out, because I think it's so important. And I hope people don't have to literally break their neck to understand it. And I think part of it is like just recognizing what we're feeling. And like, you talked about going into that second layer. What are we feeling? I'm like, oh, I'm actually kind of anxious every day. I'm stressed every day. I'm drained every day. And recognizing like, it doesn't have to be that way. There are options. There are ways it could be different. And, one of my exercises I do a lot with my clients is I'm like, okay, so what would be an ideal, like a good day at work? What's a day when you would come home energized and excited? Like, what would you do that day? And they're like, oh, I would do this, and I would do this, and I would do this. Like, okay, great. What's your current day like? They're like, ugh, it's meetings and this idiot, and I got to deal with this, and I have to fill out that process or this report. Like, okay, that's a before. We have an after now. How do we close that gap? How do we move in the direction of this energizing day? And they're like, ooh. It never occurred to them that was a possibility. But once I bring attention to how unsatisfying their day is, and I show them a possibility of what it could look like, that's their own words. Like, I'm not telling them. It's like their own words. They're like, they start to see the possibility. Like, ooh, if I want to do more of that, that means I have to say no to that meeting, that person, that process. And again, just because I can do it doesn't mean I have to do it. I can say no, because really what I want to do is this thing over here.
Yeah, so that's exactly what I was going to say. Yep. Comes back to what you said earlier. 3 years in at Google, like, I can do it, but I won't do it anymore. Like, having that awareness. With your clients or even with yourself, what do you think it takes for somebody to finally recognize and accept that you don't have to just keep saying, I can do it or I have to do it, that you can actually say, I won't do that anymore? What's sort of the turning point for people?
One of my mentor coaches once said, there's only two reasons people change: desperation and inspiration. And I actually think you need both. You need the desperation. You need to bring attention to, how does your current situation feel? Actually feel that low-grade fever, feel the stress, the drain, the anxiety, and bring attention to it and say like, ooh, it doesn't feel good to be where I am. But even that's not enough, because it's like, well, I don't know what else I could do. So then you need the inspiration of, this is what life could look like. And what's so important about that is it's hard to say no. Nobody likes saying no. It's easier to say no when you're saying yes to something else. I have made this commitment over here. So it's like, common example again, I'm a parent. If you say, I'm leaving at 6 p.m. because I don't want to work anymore, everybody looks at you like, slacker. If you're saying, I'm leaving at 6 p.m. because I have to go pick up my kid, everybody's like, yeah, of course, makes sense. It's like it, and that, so what are you going to say yes to that's going to be more important to you than work? I'm leaving at 6 p.m. because I committed to, my local, I don't know, I'm volunteering at this shelter tonight. Oh, okay. Yeah, that's a legitimate excuse. I mean, it should, I wish it were true in our society that being like just leaving work because you want to is a legitimate excuse, but unfortunately not treated that way. But, you can fill your life with other things. I'm leaving at 6 p.m. because I have a date. That works pretty well.
Yeah. Or even just that, like, you can have that yes for yourself. And honestly, like, it's nobody else's business. You should, and this isn't the world we live in, you should just be able to say, no, I'm not working past 5 or 6 or whatever it is, and leave it at that. Because I know, just as a single person without kids, there were times when I was working at DOJ that I was expected to stay later because I was the single person and I didn't have kids to go home to, which normally, if I wasn't being forced to, I would have happily done that because these people were my friends. And yes, I want you to get home to your kids. That's my choice. I'm happy to do that. Yeah. But when somebody tells you, I expect you to stay later because you don't have anything else going on in your life.
That's rough. That's rough.
Yeah. Well, and I want to really kind of paint a clear picture for folks here. And one of the second reasons that I wanted to talk to you, in addition to just your whole experience and your trajectory, was that you were somebody who made kind of a late stage, big career shift from the golden handcuffs to your own business. And I'm sure you've come across other coaches in your work and just in the oceans that we swim in now, that there's a spectrum of people who do just take a leap, like no savings, no, like, I can't take this anymore, I got to do something different, all the way to the other end of the spectrum, to folks like yourself who had a nest egg saved up, had that kind of cushion. I was kind of closer toward the first end of the spectrum, not quite there. I had a little bit of money saved up. I had kind of silver handcuffs with the federal government, maybe not golden ones, but they were still pretty cozy handcuffs. So I had a little bit of savings that I blew through very quickly. And in hindsight, I don't regret how I made my transition. And if I'm going to talk to other people, I want to sort of encourage them to, if they can, do more what you did, which is to save up as much money as you can. Because starting your own business, especially if you have a family, a kid on the way, like you had at the time, it is going to cost you a lot more than you think just to get it up and running. All the stuff you have to invest in, all the tech, all the like marketing, whatever. And to give yourself that cushion so that you're not trying to build a business from a place of desperation. And so I kind of wanted to pick your brain a little bit about, what would you tell folks who are recognizing that something has to give, that they either need to make a career shift or get out of their career and start their own business? What's some advice, words of wisdom that you can give people at this stage of life to be able to do that?
I'll give the joke answer first. It helps that I'm married to an engineer from Apple. People are like, you're so brave. It's like, really, I'm not. We have a big tech salary in the family. We're fine. Like, even if I made $0, we'd be fine. I mean, I'd want to contribute my half, but
that's the male dominated society, and you talking like, So, yeah.
Yeah, it's so interesting because it's like most couples work the other way. It's the guy that keeps the job after kids come, and the woman takes the part-time, flexible schedule job, so that they could be around for the kids. And we did it opposite because I was ready to do that, and that's what I wanted to do. So,
Which is awesome. Yeah.
but yeah, I mean, so aside from having a spouse that's supportive and the other thing I would say is, like, I mentioned before that my advice is always go talk to somebody. So it's like, go talk to people who've done this path before. Like I'm open. I will talk to new coaches all day long well, not all day long because I have to make money, but I'll talk to a few of them to give them guidance. And a lot of coaches are very generous in that way. So talk to them. But to the real point of, like, how do you make money doing this? I tell people, you don't have a business unless you're solving a problem for people that they will pay you to solve. The part that people miss. They're like, oh, I got the training as a coach. I have all these skills. It's like, nobody cares. It's not about you. What is the problem you're going to help people solve? And why are you uniquely positioned to help them solve it? What's going to make you different from every other coach out there that is also going to offer to help them solve it? And those two things you can discover through conversation. Go talk to 10 people who you think you could help. Understand their problems. What are they struggling with? Think about how you could help them. And what makes you different than the other people that want to help them. And I think those are the steps that one could take to really set yourself up for success. And I mean, it's common wisdom in the startup world. Like, in the lean startup model or whatever, they say, like, go talk to 50 customers before you build anything. Understand their problems. Same thing applies in the service business. Understand your customers. So I think that's the first piece of advice. And the second is what you said. It takes longer than you think. Again, I've been fortunate to talk to a bunch of coaches, and they all told me it'll take you 2 to 3 years minimum to get your business to be self-sustaining. Like, to where you're actually getting enough referrals and stuff that you can actually relax a little bit. So I went in knowing that's what it was going to take. So I was like, okay, I got to put 2 years of savings in the bank, and then go from there. And, like, that's what I did. And so I was well positioned to survive that. But if you go in like, oh, I'm going to be making money in 3 months, like, very unlikely. So patience and preparation.
Patience and preparation. Yeah, because you might have a little bit of, I hate the phrase beginner's luck, but you might get a little bit of a windfall, and you get a few clients in the beginning and you think, oh, this is going to be easy. You have to be prepared to ride that roller coaster and ride that uncertainty of entrepreneurship, because it is never steady. It's always going to be up and down. And something that you, when you were talking about previously about the distinction between, like, hobby and passion versus having a business. I love that you said you really want to think about, what is the problem I'm going to solve, and go talk to 10 people, 20 people, whatever. See if you can really help them. See if that's a problem people actually realize that they have, that they want to be solved. Because sometimes we can see the problem, but if people aren't ready to see their own problem, then forget it. Yeah. So that really distinguishes between somebody who might just feel passionate about, well, I'm good at helping my friends with their problems, so I'm going to be a coach or start my own business. That's kind of a passion project. Can you really make money at it? Can you have a sustainable business? Go do the things that you talked about. And so I really think that's pretty critical advice. So tell us, what is the problem that you help people solve now with your business?
Yeah. I do want to give credit to, I think it's Cal Newport, who wrote a book called So Good They Can't Ignore You, where he kind of laid this out. He gave the example of a woman that was passionate about yoga. So she, put her savings into opening a yoga studio and went bankrupt 6 months later because, like, she wasn't a good yoga instructor. There was nothing separating her from every other yoga person that loves yoga. And I was like, that's really stuck with me. And he's like, that last year I talked about where I was like, will people pay me to do this? That's something he said in his book. Like, that's the proof you have a business, is that people will pay you to do it. That is a test. So I want to give him credit. That was very influential in my thinking. So as an executive coach these days, I really work with, honestly, people trying to get to that executive level and really operate successfully at the executive level. And what's different about it being an executive is that it's not about the work. So we get through a lot of our career being problem solvers by taking a piece of work we're given and dealing with it, executing on it, solving it, being an expert in the details, knowing everything about a domain. And that applies in engineering and product and marketing and sales and law. And people think like, oh, so being really good at my job is what gets me up the ladder. Because it's true. As you get promoted for knowing more and more and being an expert and so forth and so on. And then there's this transition that happens. And it's not your job anymore to do the work, to solve the problems. When you become an executive, regardless of what the title is, but executive mindset is what I call it, your job is to set up other people to do the work, to figure out what work they should do, to collaborate with the other executives to solve company problems, not domain problems. Your job is not to solve sales anymore. Your job is to solve what is holding the company back from success. That means working with the other VPs and collaborating. It's people problems, not domain problems. So that's a very, very big transition for people to go through because they spent 20 years in school as an individual contributor, as a manager, becoming an expert in their domain. And they're like, this is great. This is what makes me who I am. This is where I get my value. This is everything about it. And I'm like, yeah, throw all that away and start over. They're like, what? And it's really hard. A lot of people can't do it. So that's what I try to help people with is if they want to reach that next level, help them let go of what has brought them previous success so they can learn the new skills for the next level.
I would imagine there are a lot of people of our generation, Gen Xers, who are in that kind of leadership or executive position because they've been working now for a couple of decades. And so they've risen up to that level. And as you said, it's basically a big unlearning of everything that they, not everything, but a lot of the problem solving stuff that they did up to that point and learning a completely new way of being a different kind of leader. And to me, like having seen this a lot in the federal government too, where people were just promoted up the attorney ranks to manager because they won some good cases, did not mean that they had the people skills, the wisdom, the acumen to be managing and leading other people. So with a lot of that, what I see oftentimes is that it's a control thing. Leaders, executives don't want to relinquish control and they're too far down in the weeds. Is that something that you see a lot with executives that you work with?
Oh, absolutely. I work with a lot of engineering executives here in Silicon Valley, and it makes sense. They know how to do the engineering task at an A+ level. That's what got them here. And I'm telling them, delegate it to the junior guy that's going to do it at a B- level. Like, well, that's clearly wrong. Because the work will not be done as well as if I did it. I'm like, yeah, it's true, it won't be. But you have more important work to do. And they're like, what? This is my work. Like, no, this is their work. Your job is to coach them to get up to an A+ level. They're here now. You coach them to get to that level. You put in place the people and the processes to help them get to that level. But your job is to set up the system to produce more people that do that work at an A+ level, not to do the work yourself. It's how you scale yourself as a leader. But it's so hard because in any individual instance, you're like, I could do it better than the person I'm giving it to. It's like, yes, that is true. And it's still the wrong reaction.
What's the underlying issue in that for them?
Good question. I think it's the insecurity. Like, it's still the work is still their responsibility, which it is. They're the leader. And they're like, well, I can't let this work under me be subpar quality. And so it is a bit the control thing you mentioned, but it's really that fear. Like, if this doesn't go well, I'm going to get blamed. So I have to make sure it goes well. And the way I know how to do that is to go in and do it myself. And the shift is to focus on how else you can make it go well without doing it yourself.
Yeah, it comes back to, I think, what you were sharing about your own journey and why I think you are uniquely situated to be doing this work. It comes back to self-worth, because those of us who want to control and especially micromanage as leaders and executives, it's often won't say all the time, but I'm going to say 99.9% of the time, about our own fear that if we relinquish control, it's going to reflect badly on us and therefore will make me look like I'm a bad leader, manager, or whatever it is, and then I'm really not worth anything. Like all of that's percolating underneath the surface. And I imagine it's hard to get high performing executives who like to appear that their shit is together, right? To really acknowledge that that's what's going on underneath the surface. So how are you able to kind of draw that out of them and get them to move through that fear?
Yeah. It depends. The ultimate cop-out coaching answer, it depends.
Yeah.
But a lot of times, first of all, I point out the pattern. It's like, here's what you're doing. And a lot of times by the time they come to me, they're often so stressed out. They're like trying to keep track of, their organization is growing to 50 or 100 people under them. They're like, how do I stay on top of all the details? They're staying up till 3 a.m. every night, trying to read through every document so they know what's going on, so they won't be blindsided. They won't be surprised. And they're like, well, how do I stay on top of the details? Like, well, you can't do it that way. You got to find other people to filter and present stuff to you. I'm like, ooh, but what if they mess it up? Like, you got to teach them not to mess it up, But I guess the main thing I do is first I point the pattern out, and then I ask them to try experiments. Again, because I mostly work with a lot of engineers who want to be quantitative and logical. Like, okay, let's try an experiment. What do you like? I'll use a real example. Engineering director, knows all the answers, super smart, super motivated, stuck in all these meetings. I'm like, what's going to happen if you don't go to the meeting? Well, they won't get to the right answer. Okay, let's test it. It's like, what do you mean? It's like, go to the meeting, don't say anything. See what happens. It's like, don't like that. It's like, try it in 2 meetings this week. He's like, okay, fine. First meeting he goes to, he shows up, doesn't say anything. Everybody on his team freaks out. They're like, what's wrong? Why aren't you saying anything? Are you mad at us? Is there something going on? So that was a learning for him. He was like, ooh, that's interesting. So there's like, okay, my coach is making me ask you to try an experiment. So I'm just going to sit back and observe, pretend I'm not here. And then they tried it. And it was like, he could feel himself wanting to jump in with the answer at like minute 15. And they discussed it. They got to the right answer at like minute 20, the answer he wanted. It was like, oh, they do know what they're doing. I just didn't give them time to do it. And soon enough, he realized like, oh, I don't have to be in half these meetings. My people have it. And that freed him up to go do some of the more cross-functional work, the bigger company initiatives he wanted to do, but didn't have time because he had all these meetings. So that's an example of like just a small experiment, like just try a different thing in one meeting led to this big change in his leadership. So that's what I try to do. I try to identify these like concrete, actionable, immediately testable experiments to see what you can do differently that hopefully lead to these longer term outcomes that they're looking for.
That may be a small example, but it's a hugely powerful one. I think the big takeaway is for people to recognize that they have some of that fear underneath the surface if they're finding themselves like gripping it too tightly, right? And B, to just experiment, because people need to find the evidence, reassure themselves, like feel safe in their nervous system that it's okay to do things differently. And you do that by experimenting, taking the small steps that coaches are so talking about ad nauseum all the time, small steps. So there's a reason, do those experiments. So I think that's a really cool example. And you have a kind of methodology or approach, something called integral coaching and the immunity to change methodology. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Well, those are two different methodologies. So integral coaching comes out of, Ken Wilber. Wilber, Brief History of Everything.
Integral theory. Yep. Mm-hmm.
Yep. So, and then New Ventures West, where I trained as a coach, that's the approach they teach with a spin on it from the founder, James Flaherty. And it's integral coaching makes it sound all official, but basically it's like you're a person. You show up the same way at work, in life, in your relationships, like you show up the same way. So coach the person, not the problem. And, one of the ways that shows up in that particular methodology is like, I'll see something of how that my client interacts with me. I'm like, oh, I bet this is how other people experience this. Did you know you just did this to me? And Like, this is how it came across to me. I wonder if other people in your work experience that. It's like, ooh, So integral coaching, yeah. Just look at the whole person, look at everything going on, look at their thoughts, their feelings, their body, their environment, their habits. So like you can make changes in any of those domains to kind of promote change. So like maybe if something's hard for them, they could try to redesign the environment, make it a little easier for them. Things like that. Immunity to change is Robert Keegan and Lisa Leahy. There's somewhere back here, there's a book. Immunity change.
In your library.
In my library back here. Normally, I can't quite keep track of it. But they're Harvard researchers that basically looked at why don't people change? And they have a training. I went through the training back in 2018. But the fundamental result for the fundamental idea they were exploring is why is it so hard for people to change? Why don't people just decide to change and then change? And they gave the example of people who had suffered heart attacks. And the doctor said, you have to change what you eat and how you exercise, or you will have another heart attack and probably die. It's a pretty good motivator. You will die if you don't do these things. 6 out of 7 people did not make a change. It's well, okay, so motivation clearly isn't enough because fear of death is not enough to promote to make a behavior change. So okay, what's going on? Why aren't people changing? And they developed this idea of what they call a psychological immune system. There's some unconscious thing under the surface that is so powerful, so devastating to consider that they can't change. And so the immunity change methodology is let's uncover those unconscious commitments. So food. I'm part of a big Italian family. Food is family. If I give up eating that like that, I lose my family. That's not conscious. That's deep in the bones. But boy, if you don't understand that, it's going to be hard to change. Or people like me don't exercise like that. And I don't want to lose my identity, so I'm not going to change. Their identity is more important to them than the change they say they want.
Yeah. I imagine that immunity to change is a big factor in the executives that you work with.
Yes. You talk about that insecurity, anxiety. It's there's some deep commitment. I have to have the answer. I have to be the one that knows what's going on. I have to be right. I have to show I can do it. All these things are deep commitments that are underneath the surface. And until you uncover them, you're going to be stuck in them. Like me, my commitments. I have to get promoted. I have to do what my manager says. I was stuck. Those were bars in my cage that I had put there, but I didn't realize I'd put there. And until I realized they were just decisions I were making unconsciously, I was stuck.
Reminds me of the story. I don't know if you've heard this, and whether it's a true story or not, I don't know, but this story I've heard about a tiger, I think, or a bear, I can't remember, some wild animal that had been caged forever in this tiny cage, and they let it out of the cage, and it still lived in a little 10 by 10 area of the zoo or wherever it was, because it just didn't know how to live otherwise. It just stuck to what it knew. Have you heard of the book? I have it back on my bookshelf somewhere too, by Ross Ellenhorn, How We Change and 10 Reasons We Don't.
I haven't, but sounds like I'd like it.
I think you would. And I'm going to stick all of this in the show notes too, by the way, because it's sort of similar. He goes through what's really at the root of people not being able to make or sustain change, because it's really at a deeper level than even just habit formation, although habit formation is helpful too. But if you really aren't able to develop the habit or to develop the sustainability of change, well, we want to look at the reasons underneath that. And he kind of goes through 10 reasons, which I don't remember off the top of my head, that are very eye-opening, that sort of get at that deeper level of all those unconscious patterns, which is what coaching is all about, is revealing those unconscious patterns and stories for folks that you don't know are operating, running in the background like a computer program. And so I think those are really helpful frameworks to use. And speaking of all the books back there, the most important one you have on your shelf is your book, which is called, I want to make sure I get the title correct, You Have a Choice: Beyond Hard Work to Meaningful Impact. So tell me what inspired you to write the book and what you hope people will gain from reading the book.
I mean, it's everything we've been talking about. Like, I wrote this book for my younger self that didn't think I had a choice. When I was burning out, when I was working too hard, and I was like, oh, I don't have a choice. I have to do things. And so I kind of lay out what has helped me get to where I am now, where I actually like what I do each day. I have time for my kids. I enjoy the work I do. I find it meaningful. I find it energizing. It's wonderful. I have a pretty great life now. And I work with my clients to help them move in that direction as well. And after testing, working with, 100 plus clients over 3 years, I'm like, okay, I feel like I'm saying the same things to a lot of different people, same ideas, same principles, same framework, same stories. Let me see if I can assemble it into a book. So that's what the book is what I learned in the first 3 to 4 years of me being a coach. And the basic idea is a lot of what we've been talking about. Aim. What do you actually want to do with your life? What would you like? What are you passionate about? What is energizing for you? Then understand what's keeping you from that. Like, okay, I actually use the example of the tiger in the cage in the next chapter. It's like, how are you keeping yourself stuck in your current cage? What are the beliefs keeping you here? What are the things you cannot do? What are the things you can't consider? Let's uncover them. Let's say, why not? Then there's a couple of chapters of like, okay, once we understand how we're keeping ourselves stuck, how do we loosen the bars? How do we kind of give ourselves more room to maneuver? Then we experiment and iterate. Try some experiments. Take one step in the direction of your dream. What stops you? Is it you? Is it something else? Okay, let's work through that. Then we work through some of the things that's the common blockers for people that get in the way of that progress. Learn and pay attention. Like really understand, like, okay, how do I keep myself on the path that I want to be on and don't fall back into my habits as soon as I stop paying attention, because that's very easy to do. And then the last chapter is aspire. Like, what do I aspire to do? What is the bigger goal? Now that I have this toolkit, what bigger goal could I go after that is, that takes beyond just getting unstuck to moving towards something really meaningful and powerful. So that's the book.
How is aspire different from aim?
When people are at the beginning of the book, and certainly where I was, aim is just like, I just want to stop hating life. Like, it's very limited in kind of the what they believe is possible. And my hope is that by the end of the book, they're like, oh, I can do so much more than I think I can. There are more possibilities than I imagined. And once you're at that point, then like then you can dream bigger than you might be able to dream at the start of the book. At least that's the hope or the theory.
I think that's a really cool distinction, because it's hard sometimes for people to dream where they are. They can't really see the vision that's, 10 miles down the road. They got to start with what is literally right in front of them. And so that's what I hear is that aim. And then once you do the experimenting, you start to get some forward momentum. You're understanding all of those things that have kept you stuck before. Then it's like your field of vision opens up and you really can start to dream and aspire for something bigger. So how did it feel for you to finish the book?
Good. I would say it's almost a little, book writing is tough. Like, I spent 6 months writing the first draft and then like 6 months editing. So it's like, I've already said what I want to say, and I'm like just rereading it over and over again and like tweaking it and trying to make it a little better. And I hired professional editors, so like they helped with that process, but that was a bit painstaking. And then you get something you're proud of and you release it and your friends buy it. And then what? And it's like, oh crap. Now I have to keep marketing it. I have to keep publicizing it. I have to keep finding ways to get people to know about it. So it's not enough to just write the book. Because I had this dream, they're like, oh, I put it out there. And it's like, what an amazing book. Instant bestseller. Like, no, it does not work that way. Like,
yeah.
And so now it's like, okay, back to the work of getting people to know about it. It's not enough to just do the work. Got to get it out there. So that's the anticlimactic bit. It's like, it's not enough to produce great work. You actually have to figure out a way to get people to know about it.
Yeah, I don't think it's anticlimactic. I think it's real. And it kind of comes back to what we were talking about in terms of starting a business. I think people have these idealized stories that they hear, or these like overnight successes that we think we hear about, which if those happen, they're the exception, they're not the rule. And I think we get these kind of fantasies in our head about, oh, what it's going to look like to start a business or write a book or whatever it might be. The reality is much different than the fantasy. Doesn't mean it's still not great and awesome, but it comes back to everything we've been talking about. It's all the things. It's a roller coaster ride. It's disappointing. It's frustrating. It's awesome. It's freeing, like all of those things. So I appreciate you keeping it real with respect to what it's like to put a book out into the world, have these hopes and aspirations for it, which they can still come true. Like you're still getting it out into the world. And I hope that folks hear this podcast, buy the book. It's going to be in the show notes. It's just, it's not that instant success, which I think we're so wired to want in this country.
Yeah, and my editor was pointing out, like, look, your book is good. People are going to recommend it to other people. Like, your book could very well have more sales in year 2 than year 1, and year 3 than year 2. So you did the work of getting a good book, and there's still work to do to publicize it. So that's kind of where I'm at.
Yeah. What would be your biggest hope for what kind of medicine this might deliver to somebody?
It's the title. You're not stuck.
Yeah.
You have a choice. You can do something different. It doesn't have to be this way. If people can really internalize that message, that's my hope. And the gratifying part about putting a book in the world is I've had a bunch of readers read it and say like, "Oh my God, this is so helpful. This is so identifiable. This is so practical. This is so what I needed to hear right now." And yeah, a lot of high performers feel stuck, and it's so bewildering once you're out of that mindset. Like, I have a client that's a senior director at Google. They're like, "I'm stuck. I have no options. I have to do what I'm told." I'm like, it's just like bewildering. Like, you could do anything, but they feel like they have no options. And that's who I'm trying to help, both as an author and as a coach.
I think that's just really powerful, because for people to recognize that our circumstances don't dictate our internal weather, so to speak, that even in the midst of whether you're talking about a really stressful work situation or a health challenge or a divorce or getting fired or whatever it might be, that we have autonomy, we have a choice, as the title of your book says, in how we decide to respond to and show up in the face of those circumstances. And that's really it at the end of the day. And it sounds like your book is really an invitation for people to start to find that autonomy within themselves, regardless of their external circumstances.
Yes, even if they are actually stuck. And there are people who don't have the options I do and are stuck in really horrible jobs or in horrible situations. There's still a freedom in reinterpreting what's happening to you and focusing on what you do have control over, which is, how do I react? How do I respond? What am I going to feel about this? How am I going to take it to heart? And that's what I hope people can learn from it, even if they are really, really stuck.
Yeah. One thing I wanted to highlight too from your website, I mean, we've been talking about how you work with executives, which kind of implies folks with, pretty good paying salary. And on your website, you also have sliding scale and pro bono services, which I absolutely love. So can you tell us a little bit more about how I don't want somebody to be deterred from working with you and your brilliance if they think, oh, I can't afford it. So how does your pro bono or sliding scale work?
Reach out. If I want to work with you, I'll find a way. I mean, that's it.
That's it. I love it.
I work with executives because they're high paying and they can afford to pay me a lot of money. That's good business. And if I make enough money from them, I can afford to give 10% of my hours. That's my commitment, is I give 10% of my hours to pro bono work each year, so that people that don't have those resources can get benefit here. People reach out. I can't satisfy everybody, but I will do what I can. And I know other coaches that love to do pro bono work. So if you are interested and you don't feel like you can afford me, reach out anyway, or just follow me on LinkedIn. You'll get or read my book, and you'll get most of what I say is in those places. It's just
Yeah.
not the personal attention.
I love that business model. It's one I have too. That is kind of a value of mine, to be able to make our services as available as possible and, you know, still pay the bills at the end of this day and still take care of our families and dogs and put food on the table and all of that. So there's so much free stuff, that free content, you know, your book, LinkedIn, your website, all of that, that folks can get. And hopefully that gives them an introduction to you, and then they can reach out. And it's all about seeing if you're both a fit for each other to work together. So
yeah, and I just want to make one point here about the privilege. Like, I'm a white passing dude in America. Like, I have all of the tailwinds imaginable. And then, you know, you said it's not luck, but there was some privilege involved in me getting these jobs.
Yeah.
People took chances on me. People evaluated me based on potential when somebody that doesn't look like me wouldn't even have gotten an opportunity. And I am more and more cognizant of how much that's benefited me in my career. And I want to pay that forward a little bit and help other people. So yeah, the pro bono work is mostly reserved for people from underrepresented backgrounds, from people who've been historically excluded for one reason or another. Because I recognize, like, what's worked for me doesn't work for everybody. And you know, one thing in my book, I had a good friend in one of the early passes, like, yeah, this wouldn't work for me. Like, excellent point. And I now have it called, I'll call out privilege check sections. Like, okay, this is what worked for me. So, but here's why it wouldn't work for you. Here's the more limited version that might be available to you. And so I have privilege checks sections throughout the book that call out those things when I was aware of them. And I may have missed some. If so, please let me know.
oh, that makes my little heart so happy, especially to hear a dude acknowledging that, because I think the more of us that can recognize how privilege shows up for us, understanding that privilege shows up in a lot of different ways, in terms of our neuro abilities, to our physical abilities, to our economic abilities. I mean, our skin color, everything. There are different ways that each of us has privilege. And so to be able to understand, well, how can I use the privilege that I have to help other people? And I really hope that other entrepreneurs endeavor to do that, and that if folks are thinking of starting their own business, that they look at it through the lens of, how have I benefited from my privilege, and how can I use that privilege to make this business something that can help people that maybe didn't have some of those privileges. So I really, it makes me very happy to hear when other people are doing that in the world. So yeah.
Thanks.
Well, let's move into a lightning round, because we've covered a lot of ground here. And I'm going to, as I always say, I let people know these questions in advance, so I don't put anybody on the spot. And you told me you did look over them this morning, so I know you're ready to go with some good answers. So what's your fondest Gen X childhood memory?
Yeah, I was thinking about this. And for me, a couple things came to mind. One was catching fireflies, like running around and like trying to catch fireflies in a jar or in your hands at night. Like, it's a very Midwestern thing. It's something we don't have that out here in California. And it's kind of like maybe a little bit nostalgic. But the other was, like, we had a bunch of kids on the block where I grew up, and like we would go out and play hide and go seek after school and just roam all around the neighborhood, all around, just run around. And like, I'm nostalgic for it because kids these days aren't allowed to do that. Like, if you let your kid run around, not know where they are for 3 hours, like, we would just run around, and like at 6 p.m. or 7 p.m., like the moms would all yell like dinner time and ring the bell, and you'd go home, but they had no idea where I was. We're just out. And that's something that kids aren't allowed to do anymore. And it kind of makes me sad. So I wanted to share that.
That makes me sad too. And I hear that a lot from other Gen X parents. It is a sad statement on that's kind of the world that we live in nowadays. And it's such a sweet memory for us, because I was the same way. And I was just thinking about fireflies this morning for some reason. I was in Indiana recently, same thing in Nebraska, grew up with tons of fireflies all over the place. And I was in Indiana a few weeks ago and saw fireflies for the first time in years, because we don't have them here in Colorado either. And I was so excited. I felt like such a little kid. They're so magical. And my friend told me that they're actually on the verge of becoming extinct in Indiana, climate change and all the things. So yeah, fireflies are really beautiful. What's your biggest piece of advice? We've covered a lot of advice, but biggest piece of advice for other Gen Xers going through any type of transition?
We've already said this, but it's like, be kind to yourself. You don't have to suck it up. Give yourself room. You've talked with other guests about being the sandwich generation, where you're taking care of your parents and your kids at the same time, and it's a lot. And it's very easy to not leave room for yourself in all of that and just sacrifice over and over again. And so, yeah, don't sacrifice. I mean, there's times you need to sacrifice, but if you keep doing it, there's nothing left for you to give. And then your parents or your kids don't have it. You won't be there to help them anyway. So leave room to take care of yourself while taking care of others is my advice.
These words. Yeah. Favorite Gen X era word or phrase?
Dude.
Yeah, that's like my go-to all the time. Dude.
Dude.
Yep. Love that word. Gen X era theme song for your life.
This one was tough. I don't have like music that defined my life, but eventually I came around to one song that really was pivotal for me as a teenager, was The Real Me by The Who on the album Quadrophenia. Can you see the real me? Can you? Like, that's the main lyric. And I felt a lot of that growing up. Where is the real me in all of this? Because I'm putting all these, chameleon faces and stuff. So that's what I came back to.
That just, that landed in me for sure. Yeah. And what are you most proud of being a Gen X?
I think it's just the attitude that we just shut up and do the work. Like, yes, I mean, we don't want to sacrifice ourselves, but it's not about us. Like, it's never been about us. It's always been the boomers, the millennials, or Gen Alpha now. But it's like, mostly we just shut up and get things done. And I think that's something I'm proud of.
Absolutely. Get her done, as we say in Nebraska. And take care of yourself in the process. Those are not mutually exclusive.
That's part we need to remember. That's the advice part.
Yeah. I feel like we need to have a t-shirt that says get her done in parentheses and take care of yourself at the same time.
Yep.
Yeah. Eric, I've really loved this conversation. I am so inspired and moved by you sharing your story. And I just want to kind of highlight coming back to what we talked about in the beginning, that you are somebody who you have developed that resilience throughout your life. It may have been difficult to do that, as a straight A, like nerd student who had never failed, right? And resilience is being able to go through the challenging times, and not just pick yourself up and move on, but see what you've learned from it and take that into the future, and then share that with other people. And you are a shining example of that kind of resilience. So thank you so much for the work that you're doing in the world and how you're doing it and showing up as you do, and for having this conversation with me today.
Well, thanks, Michelle. I appreciate you sharing your platform with me. And yeah, that's what I'm trying to do. It's like, I know what I've been through. I know the privilege I've had, and I want to help others. And that's my aspiration these days, is to really help others find more meaning, find more purpose, and live a life that they're excited to lead.
And tell us, by the way, where can folks find you?
Yeah, so my site is toomanytrees.com. That's the easiest way to find me. I would also recommend following me on LinkedIn, but nobody can spell my name. So start with Too Many Trees and then get to LinkedIn from there.
Yep. And I'll have it in the show notes for sure. And I do want you to share real quick with folks, and I saw this on your website, so I don't want to give it away. What was the reason for the name of your website, Too Many Trees?
Yeah, so there's a saying in America of not being able to see the forest for the trees. As in, you're so lost in the forest, you're just like looking at all the trees, like, where's the forest? Like, you're looking at it, it's the trees. And when I was trying to figure out when I was trying to explain what I do as a coach, I was like, I help people see the big picture. I help them see the forest, not the trees. And my friend and I were riffing on it, like, yeah, when there's too many trees in the way, I help them out. And I was like, ooh, that's a good name. And toomanytrees.com was available, so I grabbed it because, again, easier to spell than my name.
That's a great place to land. Thank you so much. All right.
Thanks, Michelle.
Take care, Eric. Isn't Eric an awesome dude? He has done a lot over his 50 years, and he's such an inspiration around how we can start to find our autonomy, find that power of choice, and really start to get curious about, what do you want to be known for? So I'm going to leave you with that question today. What do you want to be known for? Thanks so much for tuning in. Remember to like, share, comment on the episode. And if you have any questions, any topics you'd like me to explore on the podcast, send me an email at podcast@lifefromthesummit.com. I can't wait to see you next time. And until then, stay gold, Gen Xers.